All right. Good morning, everybody. Hang on. There we go. My name is Samantha Mirabal with Melco's application team, and we're doing our Design Shop Talk again today to see what questions you guys might have to get them answered. If you have questions while we're live, please type them in the comments. We're live on both Facebook and YouTube. So if you type them in there, don't send them privately. I don't see those while we're live. So if you type them in on there, if you see me looking off to the side, what I'm doing is checking for comments or checking for questions. Looks like Scott and Mike, welcome. Thanks for joining. All right, so are both platforms up? Let me quick look. Yay, both are going. So let's get going. I have just a few questions, so if you have stuff, type them in so we can get to those, and I'll look less of a fool at the end while I'm waiting for questions. That'd be nice. All right. So first off, on the project view, so the question is, what is null? So first off, where is this? Where are they seeing that? So when you have a design, every now and then over here in your project view, you might see the word null. And it typically happens, what I've noticed with older designs or things that are imported from other softwares. If you see the word null over there, it's just you don't have a color assigned. So easy way to fix it would be just to assign any color from your color palette. So whether you right click and go to properties, go to color, or you can do it the direct way, go right click color, and then you can go select whatever color chart you want and choose the appropriate thread color number and apply that, and then the null will go away and you're there. One other thing I did want to point out on this thing, notice right here you've got an empty element. You don't want that, right? So make sure you get rid of this, that number 10, because it's only a trim and it's not a good thing to have. So make sure you get rid of that. The easiest way would be to select all three of those and just combine the colors. Or select those three like you have there, right click and go to color and assign a color. It'll combine them all as one. So that's all. Null just means no color from a color chart has been applied, and you do want to correct that. So and apply something. Okay. All right. So the next question we had is, how do you take stitches away when things overlap? All right. Yeah, the null makes me crazy too, Mike. I always end up changing it, but yeah, it's there. All right, so let's see. Overlapping elements. How do we do some subtractions? All right, so I'm going to draw some ugly shapes. So I've got whatever that is. And let's draw a circle in another color. So I'm going to select a different color, go to my complex fill tool, which is this guy right here. I'm going to click the circle automatic input just so I can notice as I drag it, it'll make it an oval. Well, if I want it to be a perfect circle, I can hold the shift key while I drag, and now it's a perfect circle. So cool. Now I've got two shapes overlapping. So how do I get rid of those stitches underneath it? Well, you're going to select, if you're going to use the subtract tool, which is what I'm going to show you, you're going to select the element you want to delete the stitches from first. Okay, so I want to delete stitches from what's underneath, which is this blue. Then I'm going to hold my control key down and select what you're going to subtract from it, which is the circle. All right, because that's basically, I want to get rid of these stitches right here. All right, once they're selected, notice right here I've got my combine elements or my subtract elements. Before clicking on subtract, right click on that sucker. And here is where you can see what the overlap is going to be. So what do you need an overlap for? If you take things line to line, so if you say no overlap, so it's literally stitch line up with stitch with shape line up with shape, that's not generally the best thing to do, unless you're going to put a border over it. If you're going to put a border over in it, then it should be fine. But if what you're wanting is, the fills to be without, a satin stitch over that little gap, line to line, because embroidery shrinks, pull compensation, those sorts of effects, you might end up with a split. All right, so you want some sort of overlap. How much overlap? I don't know, 5 to 7 points. I usually say 7 to 10. That's just my personal preference. I'd rather have a little bit too much overlap than not enough. So 7 points is usually good. So once you have that set, then you can click on Subtract Elements, and there you go. You'll see now I've got my circle, and then I've got this one with all those stitches over here removed, and you can see there's a little overlap on there. Okay, so that works with your fills. Now, if you have a, let's say this is going underneath there, okay, and now I want to delete all of those stitches. Well, it's not, I cannot say, all right, take this, then that. Notice the subtract tool isn't there. The subtract tool works with your fills. So how would I get rid of these stitches since that's just a single line center? Well, I would add a point here, okay, somewhere inside of that. And if I hold this icon down, you'll see there's split element at selected point. All right, and then I take this guy, click over here somewhere, split element, selected points, and now it can either delete these stitches, or what's another idea? You know, rather than it sewing that line, doing a trim, moving way over here, sewing another line, what if we take that and convert it over into a running stitch, right? So these are just things to think about when you're digitizing. So to do that, I would hold this guy down, change element from one type to another. I'd say a walk normal. We're just going to replace that. So now it's going to do this satin stitch, does a running stitch, or a walk normal, and then it goes back into a satin stitch. So that reduces your stitch count. You don't have those satin stitches under the fill, but it still allows you to keep your machine moving at a high speed. All right, so those are just things to consider as you're digitizing. Is, you know, does it make sense? Minimizing trims, while some people have always asked, you know, does it matter if I take a minute off my sewing time by optimizing a design to minimize trims? Well, if you're doing one item, probably not, right? But if you're doing 1,000 shirts, that's 1,000 minutes that you just cut off, right? So you're going to end up saving yourself some real time and money there. So it's really, you know, it's a good practice to get into of looking at optimizing your sew outs early as you're learning to digitize. That way, you know, it's habit by the time you get to these massive, you know, 1,000 shirt orders, things like that. You don't have to worry about, oh, well, I could, you know, optimize the design and save some time and money. All right, so let's see. What other questions do we have? So that was removing stitches. Again, what did I do? You take what you're subtracting from, hold the control key, click what you're going to subtract away from it, click on the subtract tool. There you go. Removed all those stitches there. All right, what else do we have? So removing stitches. I was wondering if DesignShop supported a PC pen tablet technology for digitizing. Not all tablets are currently supported. I know the Wacom tablets work. Nate uses those. I haven't used them, so I can't talk to it personally, but I know he uses them. And so the Wacom stuff works well. I know they are aware of some other ones that aren't working quite 100%, and that is being worked on to be incorporated at a future update, but so not all of them work currently. And I don't know that there's a complete list. I just know the Wacom ones work. When you're merging different designs together and overlapping them, how do you cut away the underneath design so the stitches out are smoother? So that's the same thing I was just showing you here of removing stitches. Now, when you're working with expanded stuff, it gets a little more interesting, because the expanded files, there aren't wireframes. So if you just start deleting stitches, so here, let me do this. Let me open up an expanded file. How about that? Maybe. Nope, it's not what I wanted. I'm just going to open up an expanded file. So rather than me waving my hands at the screen, we can have something to talk to. Okay, so let's just as a point. So right here, we've got all these pairs, right? So if I zoom on them, so this color is all these pairs. So if for whatever reason we want to work with the stitches of those, it's a little bit odd, because right here you do have expanded point editing, right? So you can go and zoom in and find the stitches you want to move. So if it's just, for whatever reason, that stitch I don't like, I can click on it and move it somewhere else. Do I want to edit the entire shape of this one stitch at a time? No, personally I don't anyway. You can always use this select custom point selection tool right here. So you can select groups of these, and now I can move them together or I can delete them, right? So with the wireframe editing, you can absolutely come through here and let's say, I'm just, this is not a good design for me to do this with, whatever. All right. Okay, I want to delete the stitches under this box. Like I said, not a good example, but you guys get the idea. All right, so what do? Well, I got to come through here, find the stitches, right? So of this blue outline, I can again say select custom point. I can come over here and I can select all these stitches here. And this is just of the outline and hit delete. Notice it puts a jump in there. So I'm going to have to either add a trim or add stitches along there. Same with the green stuff. I can come over here, say my custom point selection, select these, and this is going to make a little bit of a mess that I can at least show you. So how I drew this, notice it deleted more stitches than I wanted because I was kind of callous about how I was choosing them. So this one, I wouldn't want to do that way. I would still do my custom point selection, but you got to kind of pay attention that these are going across. So I really could only start deleting them down this way. Okay, so I can do stitch point deletion and go through and just delete stitches. Same with my the red pair. Again, I can use my custom point selection, come in here, select those points, hit delete, but keep in mind what I just did, I kind of messed up the fill there because I selected too many. So when you're doing wireframe editing like this, you do have to pay attention to what you're doing. Just to make sure you don't end up creating issues like this one. All right, so that one I would actually undo and pay a little bit more attention to which stitches I'm deleting because some of them. All right, cool. Let's see, what else? All right, so this one was sent over to the applications email. We had a design sent over. I'm going to go ahead and open it. And so, how do I split this up? I sent it out to be digitized, and then I got this logo back, and I want both letters to be a different color. All right, so how do I do that? Okay, so first off, how was this done? All right, it's an expanded file, which means we got to do something with the expanded file. So first thing I did, or I always do with this sort of stuff, and go, all right, how was it digitized? So I just do a quick redraw so I can see how, is it already digitized in a manner where I can split? Now, as you look, it does the bottom one first. Cool, so I could insert a trim right before it starts this next one so I can recolor this. Okay, so how do we find that? So you noticed how it sewed, it did all this, then it came up to the top and worked its way back. So right here, I'm going to say go to expanded editing point, and I'm just going to click one point here. Now, what did I do that for? That's just so I could see what stitch number it was over here on this stitch list. All right, so now I'm going to navigate down through the stitch list, just using my arrows, until I see where I want to split it. So you can notice I'm just hitting my down arrow here. So now it's moving over. So this is where I want to put my trim. Okay, so now that I have that stitch selected, I'm going to insert trim. Now if I come over to my project, notice I've got this guy here. I can give it a new color. Poof. Okay, so it's pretty quick and easy to do. You just kind of got to find the stitch you want to split it at, and there you go. All right, so we have some questions typed in. Would you run through how to create a custom color palette? All right, so I'll show you how I created mine. C drive. So first off, you're going to navigate to wherever you have DesignShop installed. You're going to go to the color data, and I'll tell you, I selected the Madeira color charts. I selected this one here, or that one, whatever. One of these. I copied it and pasted it and gave it a new name. All right, so that's what this one is. So copy, paste, give it a new name of whatever you want it to do. Then open it up, and this is where you would give it whatever color number you want it to have. For mine, I wanted these to be just basic numbers. I was just giving it something to put them in an order. This section right here, I probably should have changed since these aren't actually Madeira color numbers. These are my fabric colors. So I probably should have changed that to say, fabric. You would then give it a name. And then these are RGBs. So what red RGB code for the color that you want it to be. So you've got to know those RGBs for your threads. Once you have those, you would type all those RGBs in, and that's what these are. It's the RGBs for the specific colors. And then from there, you're done. So it just needs to be in this color data chart with whatever name it is. Like I said, you just need to know what RGB colors you want, and then you can assign them that way. Okay. So it's pretty easy to do. The hardest part is figuring out the RGBs. So what the RGBs are the digital, red, green, blue color numbers. Like when I print fabrics, that's the yellow I printed. That's the RGB for that yellow when I'm testing out. So anyway, all right. Gail, let me know if that helps. Yoda asks, let's assume we have a satin arrows, 10 of them, evenly spaced out on a 15 centimeter line. What would be the best way to prevent trims? You manually added walk stitches and changed the starts and finish, and it took me 4 hours. Okay. So we have satin arrows. So, all right, 15 centimeters. What is that? Sorry, 15 divided by 2.54. 5.9. All right, so 5.9 inches. And yes, I just used a calculator. I'm sorry. I can't do maths in my head on the spot. Too embarrassed I'll get it wrong. All right, so I've got a roughly 15 centimeter line. Not that we wanted it to be a satin stitch, but that's what I got at the moment. An arrow, let's see, what kind of arrow do we want to draw? Satin, oh, you already said a satin arrow. Okay, so let's do it as no, I don't want to do it that way. I'm sorry, I'm changing my mind. This is what happens when I'm digitizing stuff on the fly. I'm tracing this guy for the moment. Yeah, do it like that. Start, stop, satin. All right, delete that. Oh, I guess I should have left that. Whatever. It's just a reference point. All right, so is that a satin? Not yet. All right, so now I have an ugly satin arrow. Yeah, and it's not even. It's gonna bother me. I'm sorry. All right, well, it is what it is. All right, so we've got a satin arrow. We want to take that, and what I would do is draw one, copy paste, and move it over. Or you can do this. Object, step, repeat. 15 spacing, let's say 0, preview, who knows? Oh, that did the whole thing. There we go. Step repeat, 15.05. Okay, Why isn't it doing it? I found a bug for you in the version, Scott. This is a beta version. So I'm going to copy and paste it. So there's 2, copy paste, 4. Oh. Sorry, I'm clicking through stuff because, darn it, I want it to work how I want it to work. Nope. Nope. All right. Anywho, what I would suggest to do it quickly to change your starts and stops would be if you select it all and then right here, you go to auto sequence. It will then generate your paths and all the other stuffs that you want. Okay. So doing that, it'll rearrange your starts and stops so that they're optimized to and add travel stitches as you need them, right? So if I had circles, right? So if I'm copying, pasting those, and then I select those and do auto sequence, depending on what my properties are set at, it's either going to add trims like it did here, or it'll add travel stitches. So if you look at the properties on auto sequence, this is the threshold for when it's going to generate walks. So let's say 50, just to be obnoxious. But anyway, so yeah, you can go through and change the properties on that, but the auto sequence is going to rearrange your starts and stops to be as close to one another to avoid those excess trims. Okay. Oh, so there was another question on here that, so right in here, I've got this kind of fill going through there. So how do I put a split in that to avoid that fill so that it would be satin stitches? So if you take this guy and I would do this one, insert split line. So hold that guy down, say insert split line, maybe, there, left click, there. So now I have a split line, and you'll see that turns this into like a satin stitch on each side with a defined split through there. So you can insert split lines like that. You can tell it to do an auto split. That's another option. So if you go into the properties, you can change the preset to one of these auto splits. Now that does depend on the stitch direction. So you see that. So, you know, the auto split, it's going to add a little bit there, which doesn't make sense for this particular one. It makes more sense to add a split line, I would think. Let's see, what other ways could you do it? Those are the main ones. All right. What other questions do we have? So did that help you, Yoda, with the sequencing? To do it quickly is to use that auto sequence and then let it do the work for you. All right, what other questions do we have? Let me go look at the platforms. Oh, yeah, all right. So here's another thing we could do with this guy is we could take this one and I could say insert splice, drag it from one side to the next. Okay, so I add a split. So what that lets me do now is change my stitch directions between the two areas. So I can have each one doing something else. So yeah, that's another way we could clean that up and, you know, give it a different look is by adding a split line, which is this guy right here, insert splice. And then you can add stitch directions to each segment. So when you're adding that splice in there, I did it quick. So select the shape that you want to edit, click on the insert splice, left click and drag. And now you have that line on there. And I can come over here, say insert stitch direction, add one to this segment. There's already one here, so I'm just going to move it. And I don't like that, so I'm going to clean that up. There you go. All right, so what's the command to get the crosshairs across the whole screen when adding stitches? So that's under preferences, options, it's here somewhere. Where is it? I always have to stare for it. Large crosshair, right there. Or full screen crosshair. Let's do that one. Apply, okay. So now when I go to digitize, I get the full screen crosshairs. Okay, so again, where was that? It's tools, options, preferences, full screen crosshair when digitizing. Okay, actually I'm going to leave it that way for a while because I find myself using that on my other computer. I did miss a question, it looks like. What is a good distance for satin stitch and a fill? I seem to have a gap between. Are you wanting to know densities or how large of a satin you can have? So the width of a satin from one side to the other, the larger you make it, the more prone it's going to be to snagging, right? So what is the largest satin you should have for most applications? And I do put that caveat in there. For most applications, I would say, 60 to 70 points is kind of the max you want to satin stitch. Any bigger than that, what you're really doing is introducing a lot of risk for snags and pulls. Now, puff designs and things like that, there are exceptions. But, roughly 60 to 70 points is the max I would put for a, from one side of an element to another of when do you switch from satin to fill. I do it right around 65 to 70 in there is where I personally do it. What else? Oh, if you're talking about densities, it depends on what thread you're using, right? So if you're using thinner 60 weight thread, your densities are going to be smaller. That's the distance from stitch to stitch, right? So from this row of stitching to the next row of stitching. I tend to put most of my densities between 3.7 and 4 for a 40 weight thread. But that's just what I like. And you'll find we all have different preferences of what we think looks good. All right. How do you miter, adjust the length of a miter corner for an applique? So it's not as super dramatic. So I assume what you're looking at is, let's turn that off. So where you've got a sharp corner and properties, corners, let's say you have that. So you've got some sort of sharp corner, so it's super, the miter is in there, something like that. So if you do not have corners enabled, so maybe that's what you're looking at. So you don't have corners enabled, and this is what you have. If you go to sew this out, I'll tell you what, it's not going to look like a triangle. It's not going to look like a sharp point because you've got a million stitches, and yes, I'm exaggerating, but you've got a ton of stitches in a small area while the stitches are trying to sweep around, right? So it's not a good look when you do it this way. It'll end up looking like a weird mushroom rather than a sharp corner. So what do we do about that? So first off, you can, under properties, this works with any of them, you can go enable corners. So if you turn on the miters, that puts your kind of split in there. Another one that I like is also to use these caps. So the caps, particularly on the tighter angles, you don't really need that miter on there. So just cap the end and it will clean it up nicely. So if you don't have corners enabled, that will help clean it up. After that, you can also look at changing the type of miter, right? So you've got a, let's say we're going to leave it with regular miters, but we don't want it to be a sharp point. Well, you can change it to a style 2. And look, that's more like overlapping satin stitch, single line centers. Okay, so you can get that kind of look. Or I can just go straight to a cap, whatever the look is you want from those corners. Okay. What other questions do we have? Nope, no one. I don't see any. All right, well, I think, so we talked about those, adding different splices. Oh, I'll show you another cute, fun trick. Not that you want to do that, at least not with this design. But let's say you had a bunch of splices on an element and you wanted to split them up. Well, you can of course do one at a time, but if you do that, you lose the other splits. So what you can always do is right-click, Operations, Break Object, and any splices that you have on there, it's now separate elements. So that's just a fun trick. So select, right-click, Operations, Break Object, or Object, Break Object. It's the same command. All right. Well, I hope these are helpful for y'all. We try to do them on a weekly basis. Next week I'm going to try to aim for Thursday. It's getting towards the end of the school year, so it's a little complex at the school. So hopefully the schools will cooperate, and I'll see you on Thursday. If not, I'll be back next week regardless, see what questions we have. Oh, let's see. Okay, so it may be your properties. So Yoda just asked, with auto sequence, you're still getting trims. All right, so if you go look at your properties, so I'm going to select everything. Right click Properties, Tie in and Tie off. If your tie in and tie off are really small, if that number, let's say, is 5 or something really small, no matter what, it's going to end up putting a trim in between your elements. So you might want to check that and make sure this is large enough, because all right, 5 is silly. Don't do that. Just as standard practice. I usually leave it between 20 and 32. But what is this number telling us? Where one element from where one thing ends and the next one starts. All right. If that distance is bigger than this number, it's going to do a trim. So stop it. Oops. All right. Well, now they're all weird colors. I don't like that. Let's do there. All right. So if the distance from where this one, all right, so this one ended where the propeller is. This guy here ended where that propeller is. And this one starts here. All right. So from one to the next, if that distance right there from the propeller to there is properties, tie in and tie off, bigger than 20 points, it's going to insert a trim. All right. So it may be your trim properties, Yoda. So try that. Okay, Gail asks, how can we make these look more like pearls? Yeah, I can change them to satin, but notice these are still larger because if I measure across them, they're 95 points. So they're a little bit too big to be straight satin. So if I really wanted them to look like a straight satin stitch, I would have to go and reduce their size. If you're looking for kind of that nice little raised look on the pearls that you can sometimes see on kind of like vintage designs, check these guys out. So if you come over to decorative, there's a star down here. Where is it? Star 13 point. This guy right here, when these sew out so pretty as nice little beautiful raised stars, and the centers are nice and raised. They look like neat little pearls. And why is that? It's because, the stitches are longer, so you get that more satin look. And then you'll notice it's crossing over the center a whole bunch of times. That's what raises. You get a bunch of pieces of thread stacked up in the middle, which gives you that nice bumped raised look. So if that's what you're trying to do, check those out. They're pretty. All right. When you're digitizing tiny lettering, do you use the text tool or do I manually digitize? I typically use the text tool and use the micro fonts. So if you come over here down to micro, and I tend to do all caps just because the cap letters, it's just a personal preference. Tiny. All right, and he said 0.2. I think I've done down to 0.13 with 40 weight thread. Not that that's a good idea, but down to basically 1/8 of an inch tall with 40 weight thread. It looks better with a 60-weight thread, but you can do some really nice things tiny with these micro fonts. They stitch out, I think they stitch out beautifully. So I tend to just use the micro fonts and go with it. The only time I tend to manually digitize them is when I've got unique fonts that are customer specific, and then yeah, I'll just punch them manually. It's quicker that way than me trying to figure out what font it is and going and finding the true type and then fixing it, and I'd rather just punch it and be done with it. Okay. What other questions? See, I'm looking, let me scroll through, make sure I didn't miss any others between the two platforms. All right, I don't see any. So I hope everyone has a great weekend. I think it's Mother's Day this weekend, so if you have any plans, have fun. I'm gonna go rowing, so that should be fun. You guys have a great weekend, and I will talk to you next week. Happy sewing. Oh, question, what do I mean punch? Digitize. Punching is the old term. It used to be punch a design. So it just used to be the old where you'd literally have to go punch out where the stitches go. So punching it is literally just another term for digitizing. It's just an older term. And yes, I keep on trying to end, but Scott did point out, I glazed over that. Connection type, change this to closest point on tiny lettering, because it'll, particularly the smaller you get, you avoid trims between it because no one's going to notice these little connectors anyway, and it will keep it running smoother and give you a better sew out of this tiny text. Okay. All right, y'all. Have a great weekend. Again, my name is Samantha. Let us know if there's anything you want to see, or if you have questions, you can send them in to applications@melco.com. Or we do these weekly, so save them up and type them in, and we'll see what we can get answered for you. You guys have a great weekend. Bye.